And thank you for staying with us. With the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, homelessness continues to impact the country as a whole. Each generation has an actual legacy that promotes an understanding of why they live the way that they do. There are social barriers that are influencing each and every generation, such as the housing market, financial stability, as well as mental health. Despite efforts being made by the city to address homelessness, it continues to be a problem. Here now to talk more about this is the program director of a family homeless shelter, and she's also the founder of I Am She, Dr. Xellex Z Rivera. And Dr. Rivera, good to have you.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for joining us. And listen, let's get right at it. When we talk about the issue of homelessness, I don't think that many times people will make the correlation between millennials and homelessness, but yet and still, that's real.
Yes, it's actually really real. Homelessness plagues all ages, but a lot of our research does not connect to the millennial homelessness. Millennials tend to shy away from some of the traditions of life, such as getting married, having children. They're staying in their parents' house longer. And if they don't stay there, then they end up in shelter. So it's a very unique population. And it's actually more privy on the family side that you'll see a lot of single mothers who are millennial age. And then on the single side, it's a lot of millennial males that tend to be in our shelter systems that are coming in large numbers.
And when we look at these numbers, I mean, is there any reason that we're actually seeing these numbers? Is it unemployment? Is it, I mean, what are the things that are actually forcing homelessness? Is it New York City being, too rent heavy? How does it work?
It's a few different factors. One of the main things happens to be the cost of living in New York City. We are the highest undergrad educated generation. So therefore we have a lot of college debt at a very early age. So when you combine college debt with the fact that you can't find a job that might give you the income that you need to survive in New York City, aligned with the cost of living in New York City, you tend to hit a hurdle where you might not be able to survive. But on the flip side of that, we're also the generation of entrepreneurship. So we tend to want to go into these businesses. We're not really loyal to corporations. So therefore you end up having more entrepreneurs. And then while you're trying to struggle, hustle and bustle, which is the New York way, you really can't afford to live in this city. So it gets kind of tricky actually for them as they try to cope with adulthood and just getting older.
What about length of stay? When you talk about homelessness, there is this length of stay component that comes along with it. Are we talking about a short-term length of stay, long-term length of stay in the area of homelessness?
It depends. So in New York City shelter, once you've hit the 6 or 9 month mark, you are then a long-term stayer. So for the most part, when you go into the shelter system, you'll see that they are long-term stayers. So they tend to be in shelter for an extended period of time.
And we know that mental health is also something that a lot of people have to deal with concerning the mental health, I should say the homelessness crisis. Mental health and homelessness go hand in hand. It's synonymous sometimes. And many people don't correlate homelessness and mental health. But give us a little bit of a background as to what you're finding when it comes to the homeless population and mental health.
Mental health is kind of broad across the homeless population. And that can be related to the trauma that's experienced, or it could have been pre-diagnosed beforehand. So as many might know, coming into the homeless shelters is traumatic in itself, let alone whatever happened to you prior to coming into shelter, which can also lead to some type of depression or PTSD there. As we talk about severe mental illness, a lot of times it is connected to what gets people into shelter. The problem or the hiccup there is that the services are limited.
Talk to us about COVID-19. We also know that the moratorium on evictions is soon coming to an end. We're expecting a lot of people to actually hit. Talk to us about what we're expecting.
So a lot of our shelters, again, especially on the single side, I keep highlighting the single side because they live in a dormitory type setting. It is not very likely that you'll find a single shelter that they have like their own rooms and their own living spaces. So COVID would have impacted those areas a little harder, or those shelters a little harder. And I know that a lot of agencies throughout New York City put a lot of cleaning precautions into place, as well as attempt to make sure that people are not going in and out. There was a lot of, there was hazard pay in New York City, which was wonderful, that helped the shelters be able to navigate through COVID. However, COVID still hit. So like, for example, on the family side, we did a lot of cleaning. We did a lot of making sure that everybody was masked every week to try to prevent the spread of COVID. However, because everything was shut down and paused, we have a lot more families who are then unemployed. You have a lot more families now that have to do homeschooling for their children that they've never done in very small spaces. So it was a very unique time. However, like you said, once the eviction forbearance or forgiveness is over, there's a lot of people that might end up in shelter because they might not have been preparing themselves. Hopefully Home Base, which is in New York City, which prevents homelessness, can assist them before coming into the homeless shelter. However, I can predict or see that a lot of people would end up in shelter once the financial forgiveness programs and things like that are lifted.
And then we talk about another problem, right? Because if you have this homeless population and schools about to get started, for those single parents to possibly have, you know, children, the use of a laptop, having necessary laptop, we know that, you know, virtual training is going on. Another set of problems. Talk to us about the issues that you have to mediate through when you're dealing with families such as this.
I mean, when you think about it, it's 1.1 million kids in New York City who are in the public school system. And believe it or not, half of that population is in the shelters. So you have to look at, when it first hit, it was a little harder because a lot of our shelters are not equipped with Wi-Fi or bandwidth for the entire building or for the clients. A lot of them did not have computers when they entered shelter. So at first, you know, it was about creating community spaces or computers where kids can come to. And then later on, New York City did eventually give these children iPads, and then most agencies had to just provide Wi-Fi. That is what we did on my side at Urban Resource Institute. We did that as it relates to making sure that the children had the things that they needed to navigate through school. However, the catch-22 to the whole thing is that while they did have the resources such as an iPad, a lot of kids are not necessarily technology savvy as it relates to learning, but it doesn't mean that they can't take in the information. Some people learn based on a teacher in a classroom being able to assist them. So I've had a couple students that had a hard end of the year because now everything is on Zoom or everything is in Google Classroom, but they really wanted to be in school. In addition to that, the meals that come with going to school, the recreation that comes with going to school, the socialization that comes with going to school is now ultra limited in the shelter system. We don't have enough space to try to accommodate recreation. We had to put in certain policies that only maybe 1 or 2 children could be in recreation at the time if it was open, because eventually the city started to close the recreations that we have in our family shelters. So it kind of was an up and down spiral. Now, in preparation for the next school year, I know that they are being offered different options as it relates to maybe 1 week on, 1 week remote, or 100% on. That gets really tricky when you're trying to monitor families and their children, because now when they're going, and we're talking about younger age children who don't understand this whole COVID thing. So as much as you want to prepare your children for, like, you know, don't touch any surfaces, don't do this. Once they get into school, they don't have the same acknowledgement.
Right.
The fact that it's COVID, they want to see their friends. And then that gets more tricky to now you have to put more precautions in place to when they come back into the shelter. How would that look? Like, well, we have to take temperatures. Will they have to wear gloves when they come through public areas? Will they have to be masked up continuously? And how we're going to navigate that with younger ages. Now that impacts the families in shelter because a lot of them, for the most part, are single mothers. And they're trying to, again, navigate getting out of the shelter system. And some of our programs in New York City require you to have some type of employment. And unless you found employment that does allow you to work from home, therefore you would have to go into places that are open, like, you know, a restaurant or anything like that. However, you can't do that if you don't have childcare. So again, the shelter does not necessarily provide childcare. And now schools being open, it gives a parent, you know, they're in between a rock and a hard place as it relates to, do I just, you know, put my kid at risk of going to school and this whole COVID thing having a second wave because I need to work? Or do I homeschool my kid and just try to navigate through shelter and it'll just prolong my stay even worse? So again, it's a really tough situation for mothers, especially in shelter, or single parents in shelter altogether.
So tell me, before we go, do you see things getting better or worse when it comes to homelessness here in New York?
Right now, because of COVID, it's going to get a little worse. A lot is happening. A lot is happening both financially for people that are living in the community as well as in shelter. I could see it getting worse. But at the same time, I do believe that, Governor Cuomo did certain things that would make sure that people, if they plan properly, would be able to stay in their housing. And then even if the financial forgiveness lifts, they should be able to stay where they were. It's amazing because COVID kind of gave everybody this empathy spell where everybody's kind of communal and they can get along. So right now, New York City is like one big hug almost, because they're kind of working with you as it relates to staying in your house and how to pay rent, things of that nature. But once everybody goes back to normal, I definitely can see an increase in homelessness, especially amongst the millennial population as a whole.
All right, Dr. Xellex Rivera, that's our way of saying the honeymoon will soon be over. Dr. Rivera, thank you so much for joining us here on Open. Listen, I want you to stay with us. We do have more Open. We're going to come back with more show. We'll be right back right after this.